Howdy folks, this is Checkers, and this is another edition of Rambling with Checkers. We are here in my Pathfinder character's Red Rocket, which is considerably upgraded from the Let's Play character's rocket. And we are going to talk today about role-playing games, their past, their present, and, well, their future. At least what I think their future may be. So, I've been around for the vast majority of it. I haven't been around since the very dawn of digital role-playing games, but pretty close. We're going to take a shortcut out of here. And, well, in the beginning, and, even to some degree to this day, role-playing games were an attempt to import into the digital world the pen and paper universes of games like D&D. So they were the developers, the programmers' best imaginations, best inventions of how to cross these complex pen and paper systems and rules into the digital world. So the computer essentially became your dungeon master and your bag of dice and took care of the behind the scenes roles, and all you really had to do was decide, do you want to attack, do you want to run away, do you want to cast a spell, do you want to move. Some of those earliest role-playing games were text-based, things like MUDs and bulletin board system role-playing games. I used to play one called Legend of the Red Dragon. After that, of course, we moved into the graphical things like Wizardry and Richard Garriott's Ultima, although I think the first one was a Calabeth or something like that. I've never actually played it. And Might and Magic, which is where, well, I started with Wizardry 4, but I came in, I really began to love the computer role-playing game with Might and Magic 1. And, it's funny that today there are, what people consider these hardcore games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Because I imagine if they were to experience, say, the original Might and Magic, they might be shocked at how hardcore those games were. Because a couple of weeks ago, I fired up the original Might and Magic, having picked it up on a sale at GOG, and I was stoked to get back to this game that got me into all of this, to all of playing games. I mean, I'd played on consoles when I was a kid, and I had my own Bally arcade, eventually the Astrovision arcade I had too. And I played on the Commodore VIC-20 and C64, but it was the PC and Might and Magic 1 that really got me into this. So I fire up Might and Magic 1. And it takes forever to roll up my characters, but there's kind of a zen-ness in rolling your characters, in especially like Might and Magic 1. Because eventually, as role-playing games move forward, they make it easier for you to roll characters. And Might and Magic 1 did not make it easier. If you wanted to roll up, say, a paladin, you had to roll the stats for a paladin, which meant you could be there for hours. And it's kind of a very zen, relaxing experience. Anyway, I get my party all rolled up after days, not just hours, days. I've, maybe an hour or two a day I would roll characters until I got a party. And finally, I get my party all together. And within maybe 90 seconds of leaving the inn in the first town, dead as a doornail, whole party wiped. Okay, well, they're not wiped out. It's not hardcore as in your character no longer exists. Sort of like hardcore for Fallout 4. Your character's still there. You just fall back to your last position. It's not, like an Iron Man mode where you die, your character dies. Although, you certainly could treat it that way. Anyway, so that was 90 seconds. Within the first hour, I would say my party died anywhere between 12 and 15 times. Just, randomly, we'd get a few paces, we'd find something that I had no clue how to deal with because there's no information on what the monsters were, and it was, well, what? 30 odd years ago when I first started playing it. So, yeah, lots and lots of death. Eventually, though, I got moving forward. I got the party leveled, and that is a great sense of accomplishment, and I can certainly see how that would be, the same thing in Dark Souls or Bloodborne or what have you, but that's not really where I think the future of role-playing games are going. I think there's a part of that will exist always. There is that hardcore element, and I think to some degree there are people who mistake their self-worth with what level of difficulty they play a game at. I'm an old man now. I don't really, have time for that sort of thing. I don't measure my value or self-worth by how hardcore or difficult the game is. If it's hardcore and I want to play it that way, it's because it will be fun for me, not because I think it will improve my standing in someone else's eyes. That to me is completely irrelevant. But I do think there is fun to be had in that hardcore style of play. Just like I said, I had fun with my Might and Magic characters again. I actually have a party of characters, I've probably said this before, that are about 30 years old. They're from Wizardry. One of these days, maybe I should fire up Wizardry 8. Anyway, so that was the past of games, right? So we had that kind of first-person party view that was in Might and Magic and Wizardry, and eventually games like Eye of the Beholder. There was also the isometric or top-down views that you would get in like Ultima or SSI's Gold Box series. And these were all very complex games when you get right down to it, between the stats and the spells. In Might and Magic 1, you had a cheat card to use the spells, but there was no in-game reference for anything. You had to know what the spell did, you had to remember the code for the spell, and then you had to enter it. And so these games were complex. Eventually they would make them easier, they would get more tooltips and things like that, but for the longest time, role-playing games remained very complex. And I think developers and the corporations, the suits that run them, made a mistake and thought that, to use the buzzword, accessibility made the game sell better, made the game better, more people would play it if it were more accessible. And I think that is incorrect thought. And I have a case for that, and I'll get to it. But as we move, eventually through role-playing games, we come up through, the 80s into the 90s, and we're still fairly complex. Up into Fallout 1, Fallout 2, things are complex. Games like Arcanum, and then Diablo eventually hits around 96. And the world kind of thinks that all role-playing games are going to go the way Diablo goes, and there is a great gnashing of teeth from the hardcore role-playing fans who feel that, things like Diablo aren't role-playing games. And, they're generally given the name action role-playing game, but they don't really play the role. It's more that it still has stats and it still has items, but you don't really get into being the character of who you are. That's in role-playing game, that's what you're talking about, is being the role. Like here in Fallout 4, we are the sole survivor, and we try and, or, you can choose to play as that character and think of it that way, or, just play the game. I try and make choices, say, like in the Let's Play, as I feel that the sole survivor, if it were me, how they would react. But as I said, the industry sort of thought, well, everything's going to go the Diablo way. And it wasn't that Diablo was extremely accessible, but it was more accessible than other games. So, and it sold well, and accessibility is the key to everything, and we start to get into more and more, you know, the real phrase is dumbing down. The, more polite phrase is accessibility, but we should all be honest. It's not that players are stupid, players are not dumb, but there does seem to be an element in the development and in the marketing and in the corporate community that believes that all players are dumb. They are all children, they are all kids who are not very smart, and of course the adults who play are, must be even less so because they're still playing games. Which always makes me wonder why these companies even hire people who aren't gamers. There are gamers, especially now, who must fit all roles and would have some understanding. Maybe they do, I don't know. Moving on, I think the misunderstanding about accessibility and dumbing down and sales comes from the fact that as all of these things are progressing, as consoles are moving forward, PCs are getting more powerful, more and more games are being developed, more and more games are simply being bought and played because more people have systems to play them on. More people are playing games. So the wrong thought in the corporate world was that, accessibility is what's making this work. No, that's not really true. And my case for that, as we stand here essentially in the present of role-playing games, we have things like Skyrim, things like Fallout 4, and these are kind of hybrid. They still, there is no denying the complexity of Bethesda's worlds. You can say they're buggy, you can say they're dumbed down from where they were, but the magic of what they achieve is simply that. There is no other role-playing game that I know of where I can walk up to this canister of a dumpster, take out the 50 bottle caps and 6 fusion cells, throw an item from my inventory in there, and reasonably expect to come back in a month and find that plasma grenade there. Most games, as soon as I left the area, would wipe that bin, would wipe the memory of what was in it, and it would just be gone. In Fallout 4, you have a reasonable expectation that if that plasma grenade is gone, an NPC came along and picked it up. So these games are complex. Their systems are less so. Fallout 4, to some degree, is a little more complex than Skyrim. Skyrim is considerably less complex in its player systems than its predecessors, even its immediate predecessor, Oblivion. The trade-off for that is a bit more immediacy in gameplay. When I play Oblivion, it takes me forever to level because I am consciously thinking about what skills I need to raise so that I can get my best stats when I level. And someday we'll go over that. In Skyrim, you just kind of go and do, and you level up the things as they come along. And I kind of like that, but I still miss the stats. I miss the more complex skills that really let characters segregate themselves one from another, so that a one-handed dagger specialist was extremely different than the guy who's swinging a one-handed sword, or a hammer, or a mace, or a two-handed sword. And that sort of differentiation is not really super present in Skyrim. On the flip side, Skyrim has this alchemical mixture of wonder that must be absolutely terrifying for Bethesda. Because when you think of it, Skyrim has this uncanny ability to play the exact right music at the exact right moment. It has an uncanny ability to show you things you've never seen, even after 6 years and hundreds, near thousands of hours. it can still surprise you. That is truly amazing. So, yes, in player systems, these more modern role-playing games are to a degree dumbed down. And that's just the nicest way we can put it. I don't think they were made so that, you know, necessarily it would be more of a living experience so much as it was, well, if we do it this way, more people will play and more people will buy it, and of course we're a corporation, that's what we want. But that brings us into the modern day and where I see the future going from here. And Bethesda, and you know, I love Bethesda. I do not hide that even for a little bit. I have loved their role-playing games since Arena, since I first picked up my first boxed copy in 1994 in a Babbage's. And I remember still picking up the box and reading it and going, oh wow, I mean, if half of this is true, this is going to be amazing. And it was to me, and then Daggerfall came along and I was hooked for life. Because, and you know, it was really Arena's a designer's note. I've made a video about it if I remember. I'll try and put a card right here. But that designer's note sold me, that philosophy of trying to bring the living, breathing world into it. And so I do kind of feel that they did that with Skyrim. I feel like the Dragonborn, but I still feel it could be more precise about how to deal with a character. It could let me do the things, you know, that a strong two-handed Dragonborn could do, like bend bars or break open a door. You know, a more intellectual Dragonborn might have a completely different path of options in its world, and this is where we're coming to the future of role-playing games. And like I said, I really think Bethesda has an eye on it. What they do with it, I don't know. They made some attempt in Fallout 4. Because I think where we are going can be seen in the likes of games like Ark and Conan Exiles, of even Minecraft, some of these, what we would call survival crafting games, I suppose. You know, there is an entire generation now that's grown up playing Minecraft. There are generations growing up right now who are playing games like Ark and Rust, and there's a new one on Steam called Citadel Forged with Fire that looks pretty amazing. But these are games that aren't really role-playing games, although I think there is an arguable case to be made that some of their pedigree comes from Skyrim mods, from mods that added survival features to Skyrim, you know, whether it was surviving the cold or, you know, even sort of like the hardcore mode from Fallout New Vegas. But there's this crafting system, you know, building the actual world. And I think Skyrim sort of picked up on it a little bit, I think, carrying out of a mod into Hearthfire, the ability to build your homes. Fallout 4 took it much, much further with settlement building. But I think as we move forward into like the Elder Scrolls 6, into Fallout 5, it's going to have to be a much, much bigger portion of role-playing games. For now, these survival crafting games don't really have much in the way of role-playing game quests or story, or say the depth even of, you know, Elder Scrolls or Fallout. Fallout and the Elder Scrolls don't have the ability to build, to craft to the degree of these survival crafting games. The two will have to meet. Some of the problems, say with Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, has always been technological limitations. The delicatessen here has a plywood door on it. This is spray and pray. A very enhanced spray and pray that can pretty much eliminate almost anything almost instantaneously, but can't get through a plywood door. I have a mini nuke in my backpack that can't get through a plywood door. Even if it were concrete that just, had impressed itself into plywood, so this is concrete, but it just looks like plywood, we could get through it. We could. Which begs the question, why can't we get into all of the buildings? Why can't the people who live out here move into many of these incredibly sound structures instead of having to live in basically places made out of corrugated junk? Well, reasons. It's a role-playing game. Just like the other video I made not too long ago, is this a car or isn't it? Is this the most dangerous thing in Fallout 4 aside from its ability to go nuclear? We've come to assume that all cars in Fallout 4 just don't move, even in the pre-war world. But there's coming a time where this will not be acceptable. Not because I don't want it to be, but because the technological limitations are gone. These buildings don't need to be boarded up. I mean, at this point, they're still probably boarded up due to some systems technological limitations. And that really does span across all systems, be they console or PC. Some PCs undoubtedly could have all of the doors open. Others couldn't. But I think this new generation that is moving forward is proving they are more than willing to play complex games, more than willing to pay for complex games, and they want these complex games. Because from what I've seen of Ark and Conan, I've played those both myself, they are incredibly complex. People are putting hundreds and thousands of hours of work into these, and it's what they're going to come to expect from Skyrim because they look like Skyrim. They look like Fallout 4. They have the graphic fidelity, and in turn the survival survival crafting genre is going to have to kind of slip into the role-playing game. I think the two essentially are going to merge. They're going to have to, because the people who play survival crafting are eventually going to play games like Skyrim and Fallout 4, and they're going to go, wow, I really dig being this important character, and I want to have that experience now in this. There is also, side note, there is also, I think, in corporate gaming, this belief that we make the game multiplayer and the kids will just entertain themselves. They'll be their own content. Imagine how much money we're going to save on programmers. We don't have to program AI for bots. We don't have to program AI for NPCs. Throw in a few monsters with some simple attack and flee pattern and we are done. That's not going to be acceptable either. And it should never have been acceptable. Personally, I've always detested that. Because, say, like when first-person shooters first rolled around, there was no multiplayer for it. That was something that came much later. So, there had to be AI for the enemies you fought. Eventually, there would be multiplayer, and then eventually, mod programmers, is basically what they were, created bots. And some of these bots, were just incredible. They behave like humans. I swear to you that some of the bots in Unreal Tournament 2004 can hold a grudge. And that's incredible. So I think we've got this conflux of things happening. We've got role-playing games to the complexity of the Elder Scrolls and Fallout. We have survival crafting. in the complexity of Ark and Conan and maybe even this new Citadel game. I don't really know that much about it yet. But it kind of looks like Skyrim survival crafting without probably the questing. But I think they are all going to have to come together. Now, the key here, and this happens whether it is in nature or it happens in the corporate world or in gaming, established creatures, established species, established franchises, established corporations get set in their ways, and a new niche opens up in the food chain, and something else comes along to exploit it. Something fast, something that can adapt, something that can then impede or even push out another species, corporation, franchise, or game. So essentially, if the older developers of role-playing games do not react quickly enough, they can find their established franchises in worlds of trouble. And in turn, these newer companies who are making these newer survival crafting games also have to be able to recognize the situations that they can exploit, the new places, the new niches in the food chain where they can expand, or even into the older places where they can potentially displace the previous occupant. So, we've seen it throughout consoles, throughout games, throughout, natural history. I mean, when you think about it, Microsoft and Sony, neither one of them were ever a big player in consoles until around the mid-90s, where they pretty much muscled out their competition fairly quickly because the competition wasn't able to adapt to new technology, to new ideas. So yeah, I think this is where role-playing games are headed at the moment. I think we are looking at a rebirth, a renewal of complexity, because complex games have proven their point. They've proven the fact that people will buy them, people will play them, that they can not just sustain a franchise, they can expand, they can make unwholesome amounts of money and make their corporate overlords incredibly happy. And I think, when we're talking about AAA development, that's kind of the key, is keeping the corporate overlords to some degree happy. It just, sometimes they don't really seem to understand that making themselves happy really kind of also means making their players happy. Sometimes I feel like they think players are just a bit too much like cattle or crops that can just be harvested at will and have no thought or mind or desires of their own. But the agile adapt, figure out that the players do have minds, do want new things, and then give them to them. So I really do think we're going to see an Elder Scrolls 6 where we are not just building settlements, we may be building factions. We may be, if you imagine the Stormcloak Imperial War of Skyrim, building forts, we may be building armies, we may be sending them out on missions, we may be crafting their weapons, we may be setting up blacksmiths and miners to mine resources, blacksmiths to hammer out weapons, trainers to train the armies of how to fight whatever this next potential conflict may be, if there is one in the Elder Scrolls 6. The same thing with Fallout 5. Imagine now that we could actually set up fortified camps of Minutemen around the Commonwealth Wasteland, that we could train them, that we could send out scavenging parties, that we could perhaps take over one of the buildings downtown, crack it open, find the wonders inside, fortify it, and turn it into a true fortress. Much more formidable than the castle. So that's where I think we're going. And I think that survival crafting and RPGs are going to make an interesting coupling, and one that has a great potential, not just for gamers, but for developers and publishers as well. Alrighty, so this has been my role-playing game ramble on past, present, and future. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them in the comments section. Let me know if there's anything you think I've missed, or if there are any other things you'd like to hear me ramble on about. And yeah, for the moment, I would like to point out that if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you will see a small letter I with a white circle around it. These are cards and links to other videos that I've made. Also, I have a Twitter link in the description of the video and on my channel's main page. If you're on mobile, it'll be on my channel's About page. I would like to thank you for being the best community out there. Truly, you guys are awesome, and you make this an absolute joy to do, and I really, truly want to thank you for that from the bottom of my heart. And I want to throw out an extra special thanks to the folks who are supporting me on Patreon. It's really helpful, and it's really helping, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. For now, though, I would like to say, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it somewhat thought-provoking. I would like to invite you to subscribe, to like, and share if you so desire, and to ask you, above all, to please take care.